Oh, shoot, did I leave my notes somewhere? All right. Welcome, everyone, to the Provo Municipal Council meeting. It is Tuesday, February 15th at 5:30 p.m. And we are calling this meeting to order. Meetings of the Municipal Council are now being held in a hybrid fashion. That is, members of the public can continue to view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chamber at the Provo City Center. The coronavirus pandemic is not yet over. COVID-19 infection transmission rates are again high, particularly among unvaccinated persons. We encourage everyone who is eligible to get vaccinated. We encourage all people to protect themselves and others by following protocols set by the CDC and our state and local health departments. Stay safe and be kind. This meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City Council YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. We have the following council members here. Councilmember Shannon Ellsworth, Rachel Whipple, George Hanley, myself, Travis Hoban, Bill Fillmore, Catrice McKay, and David Shipley. We also have various members of the council staff, and we have Mayor Kafusi and Deputy Mayor Isaac Paxman, and all of you. Thanks for being here. The opening prayer today will be given by Grant Siemens, who happened to bring us cookies. So thank you for that, Grant. That's so nice of you. Really appreciate that. So Grant, we'll welcome you up to come and say the opening prayer for us.
Our Father in heaven, we're so grateful for this wonderful day. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to gather here safely. We ask thee to bless us to be able to take away something that we learned from this meeting, and bless the members of the council, that they will be guided by thee and that we will be able to resolve problems or anything that needs to be brought up. Help us to try to remember thee and be like thy son. And we're so grateful for all that we have. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Hey Grant, I'm actually curious what inspired you to bring us some cookies and water. Oh, okay. What school do you go to? What are your thoughts on all the maps? I'm just kidding. Thank you, Grant. Okay, the Pledge of Allegiance will be provided by Cliff Strachan.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So at this time, we're going to public comment first, correct? All right. Cliff, as your final adieu, would you like to read the public comment preamble for us?
Be happy to.
One last time.
As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require public hearing, public comment will still be taken following presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, up to 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comment on matters that do not appear on the agenda that's on the screen. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded the second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will be generally limited to 2 minutes. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on this agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium. Those participating on Zoom will need to use the raise hand feature to indicate that they wish to comment. The chair may choose to alternate between in-person and online commenters. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence. You will have 2 minutes to speak. To assist the city recorder with the minutes, we ask those commenting in person to print your name on a slip of paper. It's over here on the table, and place it in the container near the podium. Online commenters should spell out their names before commenting. The comment period starts now.
Long story short, if you want to say something that isn't on the agenda, feel free, come on up. Looks like we have a raised hand by Zach Partridge. If you're called in and want to make a public comment, you're up. Zach, we can't hear you. I think if you're trying to comment, you'll need to unmute yourself. I don't know if you could see the instructions on the screen there. Okay, well, Zach, if you're trying to say something, we'll come back to you if you get through. Did you hit *9? All right. Well, you used up your 2 minutes anyways on that. Just kidding. That's a joke. So before we get started, maybe while we see if Zach can call in, I want to say today is Cliff Strachan's last council meeting with us, and it's been a pleasure working with him. We're so proud of him. He's got an opportunity to do some great things for the city of Sandy as CAO, and just want to congratulate him publicly. And want to offer up 60 seconds for any council members who want to say something real quick. If you want to say something, no pressure. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thanks to Cliff publicly. I knew Cliff a little bit when he worked at the state, and then he came to Provo about the same time I moved here, and I got to work with him a little bit before I was on the council. And he's a person of temperance and compassion and integrity, and he's truly blessed Provo with his hard work. And darn you, Sandy. But thanks for all you've done, Cliff, and good luck.
I thought you were going to ask for 60 seconds of silence. Maybe we could do that instead. No, I said something earlier in the work meeting, but I'm very, very grateful to Cliff for his many years of outstanding service. And I know there are many former council members who aren't here who I know feel similarly appreciative of the service he's given. It's just made working on the council a real pleasure. We're going to miss you a lot.
May I, Chair?
Absolutely.
I mean, ditto with what everyone said from the administrative point of view. I mean, you look at someone who has to answer to, 7 different opinions, plus then deal with the administration. It's hard for us to imagine anything better than what we've had with Cliff Strachan in just being that moderating influence, seeing all the sides, balance, respect. It's gonna, you will be deeply missed from the administrative point of view too.
We could run an ordinance and rename a locker room at the ice arena after Cliff.
That would be the right thing.
Quite the honor.
It looks like we do have, we'll go back to public comment. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
And please state your name.
Cheryl Jacob.
Wow, you followed instructions so well, Cheryl. You are the first one who has done that.
I loved the theme, kindness, as I entered the building to attend this meeting. And I'm thinking how to do a complaint with kindness.
Just put a little sugar on the end for us.
My concern is how the seniors are being treated in the city of Provo as compared to surrounding communities. I suggested that those who are in charge of senior events would visit the other senior centers and see if they could pick up some ideas so our center could function better. What really motivated me today is I was abused at the senior center by one of your paid employees today. And I'm not going to vent or name call. That's not my intention. My intention is to see if we can do it better. My grandfather owned a home on Center Street in Provo. He moved from there after selling his home to the then mayor of Provo and moved up to 10 acres on the south bench of where Brigham Young University is. And so you can have a better idea, he owned the botany pond there. So I feel like my roots are really here in Provo, and I have a lot of reason to have pride in Provo and to hope that we could have a senior center that would be like a model for the cities that surround us instead of the way it is vice versa right now, in my opinion. I think that we need a place as seniors that we can go to and that we can tell what our concerns are. Because when you consider what the options are for this, our families, the laws, lawyers, and even the entities that may have served us inappropriately, and I'm going to mention one of them. We had an incident in the building that I live in on 5th North, just off of Freedom, and the owner of the person who was responsible to turn off the flashing signals opted not to come in until 8:30 in the morning when they got turned off. So all night long, seniors were subjected to this. Okay, so where do you go to report a business that's not functioning properly in regards to those they serve? Things like that, and I'm just giving you an example. And so I think we need to, and like I came down here today, I wanted to talk to somebody about my experience at the center, and I couldn't identify who I should go to. I think that this concern involves all of Provo. So that's all of you, isn't it? And when you put a request or you go to all the trouble to it's a lot of effort to be here for me. I'm almost 80 and I'm not physically that well. I'm going to tell you another experience I had.
Sorry, Cheryl, right?
Mhm.
We usually have a 2-minute limit for public comment. Can we talk after or
Okay.
just because we do have to kind of stick to it?
I left a telephone message for you and you never returned it. Not recently, but that's why I haven't come to you.
Well, let's have you, that'd be great. If,
And I think it's important that we talk about what's going on with the citizens here.
Yeah.
And also, I need to identify, there was 15 minutes allowed. This is all you said.
Sorry, it's 15 minutes allowed, but we do 2 minutes per person typically.
Okay, well, this is a big issue and there's a whole lot more.
We definitely would like to talk more about it. Thank you, Cheryl.
This is Zach Partridge. Am I able to speak now?
Hey, Zach. Yeah, glad you made it in. And go ahead.
Thank you.
So I think you must have 2 lines going there, Zach. Is there any way to mute your computer or vice versa? Well, don't mute your phone, but.
Yeah, does that sound better?
That is better. Thank you, Zach. Go ahead.
Sorry, does that sound better?
Yes. Can you hear us?
Yes, okay, thank you. Thank you so much. My name is Zach Partridge, ZACKPARTRIDGE. I am wondering what I need to do. I'm from Kaysville, Utah. I am a promoter for mixed martial arts here in the state of Utah with Fierce Fighting Championships. You guys in Provo have one of the top MMA gyms in the state that's producing a lot of talent for the sport of mixed martial arts. And we would like to put on an event at the Utah Valley Convention Center to highlight your gym and not only work with the Utah Valley Convention Center there in Provo, but highlight the gym Agima MMA and Jiu-Jitsu. According to your ordinance 9.14.300, there is no combat sports allowed without headgear, though, unfortunately, and that would disqualify MMA from being an activity allowed in the city of Provo. What do I need to do to get on the agenda or to have a council vote to maybe look at some options of amending that agenda to be in line with the rest of the cities in the state of Utah so that we can bring the fastest growing sport in this country to be, participate in Provo and safely under the Utah State Athletic Commission, just like it is in many other counties across the state.
Zach, did you send us an email as well?
There were emails sent to you. Yes.
All right. Isaac, if you could just let us know who we should forward that to.
Well, that was a nice try, Chair. It's actually a council decision. So, Zach, to answer your question about what the process is, what would need to happen is 2 or more council members would need to sponsor a text amendment to change that law. And I'm the city attorney. I'm not a counselor, so I can't speak for whether any of them are actually interested in that or not. But they'll have to read your email, and if they are, get back to you about whether they would be interested in sponsoring that.
Mr. Chair, may I interject here? It sounds like this would be a good proposition to come from a Provo business owner. So my recommendation or hope is that Mr. Zach Partridge would work with the local Provo business owner to support that.
Awesome. I can do that.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate your comment.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate y'all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, doesn't look like we have anyone else online either. Let's get into it. We have a presentation, very exciting, recognizing the winner of the Kindness Committee's Art Contest. And this will be presented by Jennifer Partridge, who is also a Provo School Board member and Kindness Committee member. Come on up, Jennifer.
All right, thank you. No relation that I know of to the previous caller, by the way. So yes, although I am on the school board, the Kindness Committee is totally separate from my school board responsibilities, but it is an honor to be on the Kindness Committee and to work to spread kindness throughout Provo. I like what our previous commenter said about, we have disagreements, we might have things that we need to address, but we can do so in ways that are kind and civil. And even though our Kindness Week happened last week, we're done with that. That's just a start. And that was actually our theme, is kindness starts here. And we want to continue that and continue on our social media and through other activities and things we will continue to do to spread kindness, to help people be intentional about not only acts of kindness, but the way that we think about one another, the way we treat one another. And that's what it's all about. So, but we did have an art contest as part of our Kindness Week. And tonight we'd like to recognize our 2 winners. And so you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Our first winner is Grace Wilson. And you can see here on the slide a picture. I also have it here in person. This is Grace's art. It's called Family Tree. And I love here what she said, that kindness starts with remembering that we are all part of one family, a big, messy, weird, multicultural, forgiveness needing family. And I think that's such a great sentiment, that it's so easy to label each other and see the differences. But if we remember that we are all a big family, I think it helps us be more kind to one another. And I'll let you read the rest of what she said. I did also want to share We had the participants share how they've experienced kindness in your life, and I was really touched by this example. She said, one of my favorite kindness memories is when I was on a road trip with my then infant son who desperately needed a diaper change. We were both very fussy by this point. We stopped at a restaurant and hustled into the bathroom, which was full of women and no place to change a baby. I did not speak their language, but these women saw me about to cry in frustration and all started cleaning the counter, laying out towels, talking to my son to calm him. They saw me as a human, woman, and mother and simply helped me. With the language barrier, I couldn't ask for help, but they knew what to do. One family. And I love on her art how she shows so many different people coming together to make this big family tree. So Grace, will you come on up and we can recognize you? Get your own yard sign. Thank you. And then in here, we've got a sticker for you as well and a restaurant gift card. And thank you so much. We appreciate you. And we'll have you just wait right there. And then we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Our next winner is Jessica, and this is her art. I think that kindness should start with ourselves. We need to show kindness to the person in the mirror. That would make such a difference. And that was actually our first theme for the first day of Kindness Week was kindness to yourself. She also talked about how she's experienced kindness through small acts, such as someone smiling at me or someone asking me about my feelings. And I think that's such a great point that it doesn't have to be a service project, doesn't have to be taking cookies to people or things like that, as much as those are appreciated, but just those smiles, those little interactions, those ways to make connections. So, and treating ourselves the way we would treat other people. So important. So Jessica, come on up. And we would love it if the council would take a picture with our winners. They'll arrange it.
We can pull this out of it. Oh, yeah.
Don't break anything. Is that enough?
Or what?
Will the artwork be displayed in the new city hall?
I have no idea.
It will be in the library.
It is. All right, everybody smile like you're happy to be here. Yeah, he's half hiding. The name of the guy. Everybody say Jack. Jack.
I got this. I just want to say a word about Jennifer for a second and thank her for all of her work with Kindness Week. I've been involved with her efforts for a while. She's patient with me because my time is often very limited, but she's just done an extraordinary amount of work to make last week happen and keep this effort going. And it's definitely, I hope you feel anyway, that it's getting good traction in the city. And I think people are recognizing kindness as an important principle and motto in our city, thanks to you and all the good people who work with you. But I know you've carried a lot of that burden and tried to get other people to help carry it with you. So we really appreciate you.
All right. We have another presentation, not nearly as fun or aesthetically pleasing. A presentation regarding the quarterly report for the first quarter of fiscal 2022. Presented by John Borgett, our Administrative Services Director.
Look at that beautiful picture. I mean, this
That is pretty.
very exciting and great, but that is a tough act to follow. So one of the things that we have done for a number of years is we have a quarterly report. And John, if you can go to the next page. One more, sorry. The quarterly report is intended to give an unaudited summary information to the reader about the city's revenues and expenditures for the first quarter of the year, fiscal year 2022 that ended September 30th. And so what we're trying to do is just give the council and the public an opportunity to see how we're doing. And we don't have to wait until 6 months after the fiscal year or 3 months after. This just kind of gives you an idea. The quarterly report contains financial data comparing previous year revenue and expenses to the current year revenues and expenditures, along with the 5-year comparison. So it can really give you an opportunity to see how we're doing over the last compared to the previous 5 years. No data on revenue and expenditures is final because this is preliminary information. And so it's all subject to our annual audit that we get after the year end's completed. It goes in our comprehensive annual financial report. And so one of the other things that's provided is that there's quite a few graphs and just some high level information just to give you a sense. And one of the important numbers on this page, as you're looking at the revenues, is the percentage. And if you look down there at the total revenue section, you'll see that we're at 27%. And just from a simplistic standpoint, you would expect to be 25% through the year. You'd expect to be about 25% of revenues. And so we're at 27. And so that's a good indication that we're ahead of plan and doing good there. You can see with our transfers, we're actually at 30%. But and there are some areas that are up or down, and we're going to look at some of the revenues through some graphs to give you a better indication. So if we go to the next page, this shows general fund revenues. And if you look at the first column, the first set of bars, that is representative of the first quarter. And the year up furthest to the left is 5 years previous. The blue line is actually where we're at. The green line to the left, kind of there in the middle, is the budget. So you can see we're ahead of the budget. The budget's actually the red on the right. The green is the prior year. And so you can see we're ahead of the prior year and ahead of the budget, which is good for revenues. And then transfers were actually slightly down. Transfers come from our enterprise funds, and a lot of that has to do with weather and seasonality and use. And so I don't see that as a big concern. It's just kind of a timing thing. We'll watch that during the year, but overall, pretty positive. We go to the next page, sales tax, which is the #1 source of revenue for the general fund in the city. And you can see in the blue bar, we're ahead of the prior year. We're also ahead of the budget. Just to give the council and public a little bit more information, this is through 3 months. We actually have received 5 months of information. So I'll just give you an update on where we're at. With 5 months of data, which is through the end of November, because our fiscal year starts July 1st, we're up over the budget about $1.2 million and about the same for the prior year, because our budgeted number in prior year are pretty close to the same. So if we were to double that, we could anticipate that we may be $2.56 million over the budget, just looking at it. We're also 12.56% over the prior year and 12.66% over the budget. We talked about this a little bit in our work session earlier today, but really the indications and what's causing that is a strong Utah economy. It's also resulting in increased spending. We feel like it's been related to basically stimulus money that residents and individuals have gotten. The spending overall has been good. And we also feel like that the change to a lot of online purchases has benefited Provo dramatically. At the bottom there, it's our recreation, arts, and parks tax. That's also a factor of sales tax. You would expect that to be pretty similar. And you can see the graph looks very similar to where we're at, ahead of the prior year and also ahead of the budget. On the next page, you can see developmental services. This is our building permits and our basically our planning and zoning. And we're actually down a little bit this year. I've talked with Bill Pepperoni about it, and we have over the years have had some really large projects that come in, and they're sometimes when the permits are issued and when that all happens, it kind of bounces around a little bit. And so we are down some. We'll watch that closely. Through the second quarter, some of that comes back, but we're still below our budget and below the prior year. And as we look at on our planning for fiscal 23, we're anticipating that our developmental service fees will be down some. And so that's in it. We're watching that. If you scroll down to Parks and Rec, see we're right on budget and ahead of the prior year. Continue to do well in our Parks and Rec area, and so that's positive. If you go to franchise fees, and primarily these fees come from the biggest franchise fee comes from our own utilities that we operate. And as we saw the utilities, as we saw our transfers, they were down slightly. So we're close, but we're slightly below the budget and slightly below the prior year. Justice court revenues is an area where we continue to see revenues that are lower. We continue to be impacted by the pandemic. The state basically provides us guidelines that we need to follow, and so we're still operating somewhat on a limited basis, particularly when you talk about jury trials and other things. We're also seeing that there's a lot more virtual. People are handling their court cases virtually, and so the dynamics are changing, and so we're watching that. But it continues to be an area where revenues are much less than they were prior. And as administration, we're looking at that closely. This is just the general fund summary. You can see that we're that 27%. It's the same thing that we looked at before on revenues, but expenditures, once again, we're at about 21%. So we are running below our 25% for the budget for the year, which is positive. And it's pretty typical too. Sometimes, particularly when you get towards the end of the year, there's some spending that increases, but nonetheless, it's something that we'd want to look at, and that looks fine. If we go to the next page, this shows just appropriations that have happened for the first quarter, about 1.1 million, and just kind of gives you an indication of what's been spent there. And then our innovation fund, we just provide a current balance and where we're at on those various projects that we're operating on. So just gives kind of a good view of that. And then the library, a primary source of revenue that comes in from the library is property taxes. We get most of those property tax revenues in November and December when people pay for their taxes on their homes. And so it's revenue is pretty small, but once again, that's pretty typical. We're actually slightly above the other areas. The enterprise funds, I'm not going to go through each one of those. They're there, and I'd encourage council to look at it. But generally, let's talk about the golf course, and then the utilities, I'll just talk about them in general. The golf course, as you can see, above the prior year and above the budget. As you're aware, as we've now have the course is fully open, and we've starting to build a standard base there. Very positive and looking good. As far as the utilities go, I'll just mention that they're in good shape. The water fund does tend to depend on rain and seasonality and what happens. And so we were slightly behind the prior year and also the budget, but we're still watching that and think we'll be fine by the end of the year. The other utilities are all pretty much on track. And so I won't go through each of those, but I would just say that as a general rule, other than a couple of areas that I just mentioned, we're looking good through the first quarter, and I'm happy to answer any questions that the council may have.
Must have done a great job.
Okay, exciting stuff. Thank you.
And the colors were very aesthetically pleasing, by the way. All right, now we get to our action agenda. This is an ordinance amending Provo City School Board districts. It has citywide application. And I guess Cliff, you'll be presenting this?
Yeah, if you'd bear with me, I'll just quickly go over for our audience very quickly the slides I showed you earlier. Okay. So the council and council staff started working on this several weeks ago, and there's two parts to your redistricting. One is the school district maps, and the other is the council maps. For those who are following along, the council maps are currently up on redistricting.provo.org, where people can draw maps. They'll be coming to you, council, along the same similar process to what we're doing with the school board. You'll have those in March, and you'll have the opportunity to adopt those at that time. You must have them adopted by May 10th for those, but the staff's plan is to try and help you get through in March to get those finished ahead of budget time. For those who are interested in the school district maps, we are at the point where we need to adopt, the council needs to adopt the maps tonight. We have to provide all the materials to the county, the Utah Geospatial Resource Center, and the state elections office, so that they can enact these maps in time for the upcoming elections for school boards. So the council had created these. We asked council what some of their issue criteria were, and these are the ones that we listed. Substantially equal in population, contiguous compactness, core preservations, question whether it was important that incumbents were displaced or not, should there be a West Side district, and how many schools in districts. So we had 105 maps. John, this is not working. Okay. So you established your criteria. We weighted your preferences based on a survey we did of each one of you. Next slide. These are the maps the council approved as their top 12. We submitted the top 6 to the school board, and the school board did an independent review of 105 maps, and they came back with a unanimous recommendation for these 4, which we've now labeled Map W, Map E, Map N, and Map T. And then it was understood that the board members, from the discussion at their work meeting, that they weren't really interested in forming a West Side only district. So then we put all these maps on Open City Hall for about a week. 31 surveys were completed. The top ranked maps ended up being the maps W, E, and N. I'm going to quickly show everybody what these finalists were. This is map C. On each one of these files, you'll see up in the upper corner that there is a upper left. It'll talk about some of the distinguishing features of it. For example, this one has 2 schools in each district. 2 incumbent school board members will end up in the same district. Half of West Provo is in a district. Most districts are compact, and there's 91% core preservation, meaning that the number of the rough general area of the precincts are roughly equivalent to what they are currently. The next map was map E. Again, this one has 2 or more public schools in 5 districts. There's 1 school in 2 districts. There's no incumbents displaced. Most of West Provo is in 1 district. All districts are compact and 91% core preservation. Those last 3 items are pretty consistent all the way through these. Next one, John. I'll put this away. Map N, again, 2 or more schools in each district. 2 district members would end up in the same district. Next one. Map R, 2 or more districts, 2 council members in the same district, all the same things. Map T, 2 or more, but 1 district will only have 1 after Wasatch and Dixon students are relocated in a few years, and then no displacement of board members. Map W had 2 schools in each of 6 districts, with 1 in 1 district. No displacement. Half of West Provo was in 1 district. And I would stop there. These are the maps that, is there one more onto this? Is it the question? Okay. So when we looked at all the rankings and weighted them, this is how they weighed out. So your top 4 from all the ways we measured it were W, E, N, and T. And as you recall, they have different distinguishing features. Now, the council was given all of these slides earlier, and they've had a chance to look through them on their own. And what we had suggested earlier is that now having have a chance to discuss them. One of the suggestions was to poll you as to what your top map is, and then see if there's one that comes to the top from that process. And if there's not, then we can talk about eliminating, the least popular until we get to a point where we've got a maximum. That's one way up into, and unless somebody on council wants to actually move a specific map and have the discussion from there. Councillor Hoban, I'll defer now to you as to whether you're going to poll or the discussion. I'll just wait here for instruction.
Thank you. So we actually need to open this up for public comment, right?
Yeah, you can do that now before you've even picked one.
Well, are there any questions for Cliff? I mean, just for the public's benefit, we did discuss this in work meeting for a decent amount of time. But any specific questions that you want to bring up? Okay, thanks. We'll open this item up for public comment. So please call in if it's important to you. *9 to unmute. Raise your hand. Let us know. And then also, anyone from the chamber here like to comment? Come on up.
Yeah, just a reminder that we may alternate between in person and online.
And we'll get the 2 minutes. Thank you.
My name is David Wright. I'm from Provo. I'm the neighborhood chair in the Rock Canyon neighborhood. I would like to talk about voting districts in Provo. Provo is very unique. Provo has a population, according to the 2020 census, of 116,594. And yet the number of registered voters in the 2021 election was only 43,986. So this is not for lack of civic involvement, I don't believe. It's because Provo has a lot of residents that are here temporarily, students especially, and they may be registered to vote. They're just not registered to vote in Provo. And so this gives some unique problems when you do your districting. And what could happen is you could have a whole bunch of registered voters in one district and then another district with very few. And so the best thing to do is to balance this as best possible. And I'd like to speak in favor of W, because I think that does a pretty good job of carving up this area around Brigham Young University and putting them in the districts so that they're fairly balanced. But I would like to point out something. In the 2019 election, Bill Fillmore was elected with 3,890 votes. In the 2021 election, George Hanley was elected with 1,153. Now, I have great respect for George, and I think the people in the Tree Streets and Oak Hills are registered to vote as much as the people in Northeast Provo. It's just that George has a lot of Brigham Young University in his district, and those people don't vote. I'd like to remind you that 10 years ago, when this redistricting was done, they also gave the registered voters and suggested districts. So I hope you will do that for the city council so that we'll be able to see how balanced it is. Thank you very much.
Doesn't look like we have any callers. Come on up.
Hi, Terry McCabe, Franklin neighborhood. I want to clarify something. On the school board, it was not unanimous. I did not agree with the maps that were chosen, and I do think that the west side needs their own district. Do you have any questions for me?
Do you know which map you did prefer?
I do. I have the map. This is perfect. That was my favorite.
Well, with a name like that, how could it not be?
Right?
While we have Terry up, does anyone have, she's a member of the school board, of course, you know that. Any questions for her? Thanks, Terry.
Hi, my name is Eric Chase. I am the neighborhood chair in the North Park neighborhood in Provo. I'm also the vice president of the community council at Timpanogos Elementary School. I want to say I'm pretty disappointed in your discussions you had earlier about the school boundaries. I know it's easy to have philosophical discussions about other people's neighborhoods but not really your own. The way the precincts are drawn, it's necessary that some elementary school boundaries are going to be split up. Some of the maps you're considering have every single elementary school that's Title I elementary school that has lots of low-income kids split up. Every school in Central Provo split between 2 or more districts. But when the idea of Wasatch Elementary School being split across multiple districts was brought up in your work session earlier today, Mr. Fieldmore suggested that was gerrymandering to split that elementary school boundary up. It's easy to say that the school board members and the city council members are going to vote for whatever is in the best interest of the city and put aside their personal biases. But even Mr. Handley earlier suggested that he was going to vote whatever gave his Wasatch and the Tree Streets area more representation on the school board. I know it's a taboo subject, but I want to bring up how racially and economically segregated these school district boundaries you're creating are. I have a few stats from the Provo School District about that. So the 4 Northeast Provo elementary schools that you in your maps are giving 3 of the 7 board members only to represent those schools. They have a combined total of about 209 ELL students where English is not the primary language spoken in their home. Just Timpanogos Elementary has 283. And so those 4 Northeast elementary schools have about 10% ELL students. Many of the schools in Provo are approaching 60%. So when you're voting to provide more representation to your neighborhood, you're doing that by taking it away from the low-income neighborhood, the areas with underserved populations already. There's 13 total elementary schools in Provo, and with respect to the neighborhood program, and I'm a neighborhood chair, the elementary school boundaries are the fundamental unit of government many people interact with on the most local scale through PTAs and community councils and things like that. And when you're splitting all the low-income schools across multiple school districts, you're not providing more representation. When it happens to one of the more well-off, mostly almost entirely white schools, it's gerrymandering. But when you're doing it to the west side or to low-income schools, you're calling that an opportunity for more people to be involved. And that's just not the case, because it makes it impossible to build coalitions within the schools, and it's impossible to recruit candidates for those things. Lots of times, several times you guys have mentioned the need to divide it this way to make sure that all the districts get quality candidates. But I just want to remind you which of the council members here ran unopposed in their last elections. And it's the people from Northeast Provo, those 2 districts, and which school board members ran unopposed in their last elections. And it's the people from the east side, and specifically the Northeast districts. So I think the way you guys have approached this does a disservice to everyone in Provo at the expense of the few neighborhoods in the Northeast.
Hey, Eric. Thanks. Eric, did you have a map you loved? Just one?
I sent everyone a map. I did not get it submitted before.
So you created a map, and
I did create another map.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
More comments from the chamber here? Okay. Doesn't look like anything else online. So now we'll bring it back. to the council for discussion. Go ahead, Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, could you bring up, whoever's driving, could you bring up map E?
Which one?
E.
Yeah.
It's E and W. And so let me just point this out and then you can flip back between E and W. So E and W were the top two preferred by the school district as communicated to us. And they're different, as far as I can tell, in only one way. And that is the boundary between the blue and the purple. So what's District 3 and District 4?
On the far right side.
Yeah, thanks for pointing to it. Yeah. So W has a lower boundary with the blue, a bigger blue, and then E has a bigger boundary to the north. And I just point that out because those are the two that I like the most. And those are the two that the district apparently liked the most. So I'm just calling your attention to that difference. And I visited with Councilor Handley about this, and this kind of overlaps both of our districts. And so we had a good conversation about this. But just for sake of your information, if you haven't lived in southeastern Provo, you can see where State Street is in the purple, the south side of State Street. And what's west of State Street is, it's not going to be, there's not going to be a lot of participation in voting, I believe. And maybe there's going to be participation in voting, but there probably won't be very many candidates who come from that half of the purple. So it's almost exclusively like over 90% townhomes and apartments, and it's right next to the railroad track, or it's in the East Bay area. So I point that out because any candidates we have will come from the east side of State Street. And so if you go back to W, thank you, you're just kind of creating this smaller spot where you're more likely to always have a candidate from that small spot that is east of State Street. So there's some assumptions there, but having lived there, I don't know, probably longer than all of you, I just wanted to point that out, that's kind of how I lived there for 6 years. And I just wanted to put that information out there. One, to distinguish between E and W, and two, to point out that half of that purple area, I just don't think that, I think there's going to be more transients there because of the quality of life, because of the housing types. And you're probably just going to get more candidates from the other side of State Street. Though, yeah, that's my opinion.
So what are the implications there then? What are you?
So my recommendation, based on those assumptions, is that E should be prioritized over W, because you would get a bigger swath of potential candidates to run for office there. And Provo Peaks? What about Provo? And Provo Peaks? Correct. So that's another difference, is in E, Provo Peaks is in the purple district, whereas in W, Provo Peaks is in the blue district, Provo Peaks Elementary. And it's just kind of a funny boundary, like I pointed out in the work meeting, that Provo Peaks is going to be on this weird corner of a precinct with.
So are you making a motion?
I can. Would you
Please
like
do.
me to?
Yeah.
Okay. I move that we adopt map E as the final, help me out here, as the final map for the school district boundaries.
Thank you. Is there a second on the motion? Seconded by Councilor Handley. Okay, now let's discuss the motion. I'm just getting the ball rolling.
Very efficient.
Yeah, I just want to address something that Mr. Chase said. I really respect him, and I if I said it in the way that it was quoted back to me, that was not my intention. To declare that I refuse to vote for anything that would split up Wasatch. I mean, obviously, as I've looked at this carefully, I realize that there are ways in which I could do that compromise other schools in a way that is not fair in the way that you've described. And I'm sympathetic to what you were addressing. I mean, I think I was starting with that area because that's the area that I live in, that's the area that I represent, and that's the area that I have my, most intimate knowledge of. But your point is well taken, that we are to be considering the whole fabric of the city and not just our own area. So that was not, my intention was not to declare a line that I wouldn't cross, if that came across that way. I think I feel like a lot of counselors here that I don't like any of them for lots of reasons. I like most of them for some reasons. And I didn't ever really feel like I saw a silver bullet, but I also feel, I recognize that our role as the council, as the city council, is sort of overriding the school board in the way this is set up, right? The school board makes a recommendation, or we asked for one, but I guess even legally we didn't have to, which felt really weird to me. I feel very deferential to the school board on this because this is their primary responsibility more than it is ours. And obviously, I suppose we are to function in some sense as a balance and a check on the school board in case there's some reason to believe that I'm hearing myself. That's weird. If there was some reason for us to believe that the school board was out of line or whatever, then maybe I would, feel more inclined to dramatically push for something quite different. But I don't have that feeling, and I feel, in fact, I would feel there would need to be quite a compelling reason to go against their strong preferences. So I have been kind of leaning towards their top two in particular, W and E. I don't have a super strong feeling about one over the other. I think Councillor Ellsworth's arguments are well taken. I do think that, Mr. Wright mentioned my district has, you were talking about council districts and we're talking about school board districts, which are slightly different, but there's the similar structure here where, we have to figure out what to do with the student population. Many of us received an email from Dave Harding suggesting that we should put all of that into one district. He and I have exchanged our thoughts. I don't agree that that's an adequate solution. It feels to me like a parent-child desert to create a district that's made up almost entirely of college students. I think there's a real risk of there not being a candidate at all, frankly, given some of the rates of registration and voting there. So I recognize that at least the blue in map E includes one of the highest voting districts in the city, and then of course a good portion of the lowest. And so that probably balances itself out from my point of view. I'm just speaking about that side of town, but I do like the fact that there's a healthy portion of the west side in two different districts. I understand that, there are many who've expressed their opinion to us that they would prefer one solid west side district. I said earlier this afternoon, I'm not entirely convinced that splitting one part of the city into two decreases the representational power of that area. It actually could arguably increase it. I do think there's a point of diminishing returns, as I said earlier, also where that could not be the case, but a really healthy chunk of the west side in two different areas seems to me to be an adequate solution. And the other thing I kind of like about E is that there seems to be, I know there's downtown, I would prefer if there was a really solid block in the middle there. There is at least a reasonably sized brown chunk there. But I have misgivings about the way it sort of creates so many borders in the downtown area. That's my misgiving, but I can't find an adequate resolution to some of those misgivings. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm at, which is to say, I guess I'm supporting E.
Other comments? Councillor Whipple.
So when I was sitting this morning going through all of the hard copies of the maps, I did not like either E or W because I was looking at downtown area and keeping that together. I was not thinking about Wasatch at all. I was really surprised when, of the ones that we had before us, N and R seemed to be the best to me. And George had just rejected both of those outright because of the impact on Wasatch. I hate all of these. And I don't know a good way to move forward on this to balance it, because the schools that I'm looking at that are in the district I represent are going to be splintered into different districts with all of these maps. And I don't like that because these are all Title I schools. And it's hard for a lot of those parents to participate. And by splitting up those districts or those school communities into different districts, you're creating another barrier for them. I have heard from many constituents and interested people that they want a strong West Side. And based on these criteria, none of those maps filtered up to the top. And so I feel conflicted about that as well. So I'm at a loss. That's all I have to say.
Can I ask a question about that? I'm just curious to learn more from you. Tell me about the Title I schools and how separating them could have negative impacts, or how putting them in one or more, kind of making them more compact, I guess, would have positive impacts. Tell me about the pros and cons.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We've talked about this a little bit, like whether it's better for a school to have two different school board members with an interest in that school. Yeah. But it also means that that school community has to be divided in voting for 2 or 3 different board members. And so it's hard for the PTA to recommend, okay, we like person A in this race and person B in this race and person C. That's too many people, right? That becomes really confusing. Or, you'll have the meeting and half of the parents who want to be involved won't be able to vote for anyone at that particular election. And it feels really weird. So I will say that I don't know how this actually works out as being good for more representation or bad, because you don't have your person, your point person who you can go to.
So just to clarify, it sounds like ideally you would want every school boundary to be within one single district. Is that what you're saying?
Right, but that's impossible because of the way the precincts are drawn. Yeah. I recognize that.
It's just that like those competing layers of school boundaries over precincts just won't align.
Right. And so then something that we should look at is which schools do have a school board member who just represents that school or those 2 schools, and which schools are split, and how that changes the concentration of the voice. If we have one school member who's looking out for 3 or 4, how do they balance that, and how do they advocate for their schools versus the school board member who is just gung-ho for their 2? Like that division of attention, I don't know how well that works. That would be a question for a school board member who's done it.
We have 2 here.
Yeah, we do.
I mean, I wonder, again, I keep asking this question. I mean, I wonder if you necessarily have less representation of a particular school's interest and problems. And maybe I'm contradicting my own concern, which I acknowledged earlier to you anyway, that it's not necessarily the worst thing to split up a school's boundaries if, especially in some ways, if the school's vulnerable, maybe there's more eyes on the problem. I mean, I'm just not as confident that the drawing of the boundaries is the one thing that makes the difference between a school board that pays attention to the vulnerable schools and a school board that doesn't.
And I will say, I think our school board does care about all of their students and everything. I'm not saying that a school board member who's primarily centered on Wasatch cares not a whit about Timpanogos Elementary. That's not what I'm saying, because I think that they are very interested in this. But at the same time, we come from our own perspectives. Like I came automatically looking at it at a downtown perspective, and you came automatically looking at your east side. We can get over that preference, and we can be more expansive and more deliberate and being sure that we look out for each other. And I would expect that our school board would do that. And I'm glad we only have to have this conversation once every 10 years.
Counselor McKay.
The perspective is interesting because I think about the last 12 years, I've never lived in the school board district of where my kids went to school. And I have 4 kids. This is the first year I've ever lived in the area that represents my school of one of my kids, where the school board district was there. Like, I've just never thought of that I was limited by what board member I could speak to or send an email to or talked about a problem with, that I was bound by where I lived or where the boundaries were of my kids' schools, since they've been all over the city. But so it's just interesting.
I was just going to say if there's any comments on the motion.
Well, sorry, your motion, it was already seconded.
I know.
And
But when we do comments after the motion, it's to discuss the motion.
right. So I'll make a substitute motion that we adopt map N. And the reason I recommend map N is because it gives the west side us what I would consider a stronger voting block, which to me, I think gives them more of a voice with the board member that is going to be representing them. I think I think it's natural to want to be accountable to those that, are voting for you. So I'll make that motion. Anyone want to second it? Okay, seconded by Counselor Whipple. And let's discuss now.
Is that a substitute motion?
And I guess I'd like to hear it in context of some of the concerns or that you all had, or, what you were in relation to some of the things you were saying. But go ahead, Counselor Ellsworth.
Yeah. So there's something that is almost completely arbitrary about some of these maps from my perspective, and that it looks like gerrymandering. It's not necessarily gerrymandering, but because the boundary is so goofy, it looks like gerrymandering. And so when I look at N and I see this kind of hand that dips down, the green hand and then the red hand, do you see what I'm referencing?
I think they're more like fingers.
Fingers?
But okay. Hand and a finger. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the Great Lakes. Thank you. I think that people are going to say, what the heck, especially if you live in this green peninsula or if you live in the red peninsula, right? And so I don't want the job of having to explain that to people, and they're going to call me in 9 years and say, what the heck? And I'll be like, please don't call me. I do this. So I think that's one thing to consider, is that it looks like gerrymandering. Not saying it is, it just looks funny. The other thing I will say is that this purple district, there's a lot of turnover in those areas. It's kind of like, it's not like undergrads live there, like the Joaquin area, but you're just going to see a lot of churn in that area. And I think it'll be harder to find candidates in that area, in the purple district. I know you live there. Yeah, but I also know those neighborhoods, and some folks are able to stay for a long time and a lot of folks aren't able to. So I think that's something that we should consider.
I guess I just wanted to kind of hear your thoughts in context to the map you prefer as opposed to this one, or, what?
Well, I don't know if Jennifer or Terry, I don't know, maybe Terry didn't, it sounds like Terry didn't support the the W or the E. So, but I'm curious to know, I'm reluctant to go against the school board's preferences, and those were the two top preferences. So I'm curious to know if Jennifer, can we ask Jennifer to comment on that?
Well, maybe let me clarify. So they recommended W, E, N, and T, didn't they? But their top two were W and E. And was it a strong preference for W and E? Okay. I might have missed that point.
Would you care to comment, Jennifer?
Yeah.
I think we want to know if there was a strong preference for WE or if W, E, N, and T kind of all.
Yes, so W was the first choice, E was the second, and then N and T were tied for third. And I'm trying to speak as well as I can for the board, but my recollection was that W and E were much stronger than N and T. My personal comment is, as you pull up each map, I have thoughts on, just like you. I mean, there's good and bad on each. And so I have heard several board members say that they could support any of those four that we put before you.
Thank you. Can I see, and it is in context of my motion, Councilor Ellsworth. Can I see the one that was communities of interest 4 that had a complete West Side district? I'm curious if we have any random fingers or arms in that one. Well, so that is because that district or that precinct is shaped so weird, just so you know. That's one precinct that is like a weird shape. So
I get that, but it's like barely connected to the blue. It's like, it's almost an island.
Not our fault.
I'm not saying it's your fault. We didn't draw the precincts. I get that. We have to work with these constraints. It looks funny. And I think people who live on the north side of the Blue Peninsula are going to be like, why and what?
how high did you rank compactness in your survey? Because that's where that would come in.
Well, this can be related to other conversations. I don't really like islands. But there's also a brownish island. Is that BYU or next to BYU? You see that other brown island?
Okay.
So that one's kind of special. I mean, it looks, someone worked really hard to balance this, but it still looks like it came from one of our amazing elementary schools.
Okay, thank you. Additional comments? Mr. Fillmore.
My inclination is to defer to the school board's expertise and their experience, unless there's a compelling reason not to. My initial instinct was to try to find a separate district for the west side, but I'm persuaded by the fact that the west side has 2 votes, that is, 2 representatives. I think that's a good thing for the west side, at least until they experience the anticipated population growth on the west side. Then I think in 10 years, we'll be looking at quite a different map potentially. And so I favor contiguousness. I don't like islands or thumbs or whatever. I wish there was a way we could beef up the downtown district. I'm sensitive to the Title I school issue. I don't know if there's a way to do that that doesn't end up skewering the other districts. It's curious to me, Rachel, that there's no maps that entered anybody's top 10 that seems to address your concern, either from the school board or other sources. I wish there was a way to do that, but I get the sense in my interaction with the school board that they don't focus narrowly on their individual district. They don't focus on race in any kind of discriminatory nature. In fact, the sense I get is that they bend over backwards to try to find ways to help the Title I schools. That's a very high priority for our school board. So I don't know how to do more to address your concern about that downtown district. If there was a great way to do it, I'd take a serious look at that. Otherwise, my initial choice was BAP-W, but I'm sensible to Councilor Ellsworth's concern, and as I thought it through, I'm happy to defer to MAP-E. Would be very supportive of MAP-E.
All right, discussion on the substitute motion. Okay, we'll vote on the substitute motion. If that fails, then we go back to the original motion. All right, all in favor? All opposed? Okay, so Councilors Hoban and Whipple in favor, the remaining opposed. Substitute motion fails. Okay, back to the original motion. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? If not, we'll be voting on Councilor Ellsworth's motion.
Can I just ask, does anybody have, like, other than what Ms. Ellsworth pointed out in that area of purple? I'm looking at these two maps and I just, E and W specifically, which I kind of came in thinking one of those would be, it was the preference of the school board, so we'd look at those two. But other than that, is there any other difference that we should be looking at?
Difference between E and W?
E and W?
I don't see a difference between.
That was the one thing,
That's
right?
the only thing I can see, right? And so Mr. Hanley and I talked about it because that's the interface of our districts. And because I'm familiar with the socioeconomics of those areas, and the housing types in those areas, and maybe the churn or stability of those areas, it seems like there would be, and I think Mr. Hanley said this, he would be comfortable with the smaller blue area because he knows that those are precincts that have high participation. And then I can assume, based on the information I have, that half of the blue, or I'm sorry, half of the purple district would probably be low participation.
And there's just those three precincts that get swapped between the two, no other precincts.
Yeah, and honestly, they're probably not, well, I mean, population wise, they have the same, they're supposed to have some kind of comparable population, but that's like the state hospital, the water park, and student housing.
Yeah.
And then there's a neighborhood immediately north of the water park that has some more like large lot, single family.
Does anybody from the district here recall any conversation between W and E? Or was it like, these are similar enough, we'd be okay with either?
If Karen's listening, Karen may be able to speak to that as well.
Mr. Shipley, at one point I talked to, what do you call the members of the school district board member Jensen, and I just have a lot of confidence in him because he has so much experience in education as a professional and as a public servant. And he said, speaking, I'm not sure if it was speaking for the board or speaking for himself, but he felt really good about E and W.
I'll jump in here quickly. That so when each board member had a chance to present their five favorites, map W had 6 votes for, well, 6 of them had it on their top list. And so as far as a clear favorite, that's as close as you get. But yeah, it's kind of hard. They didn't have a ton of time to spend on discussing it, so can't speak to what went into every single map.
Additional discussion on the motion? Okay, we are going to go ahead and vote on the motion, which is, let's go ahead and repeat it.
The motion is that we adopt map E as the final district boundaries for the Provo City School Board districts.
And that was seconded by Mr. Fillmore, right?
Mr. Hanley.
Counselor Hanley, sorry. All right, we'll go ahead and vote on that motion. All in favor? And any opposed? And do we have a abstain? Or you need you're having a moment? Okay. We'll give you a moment. Do, 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 do. It is possible to abstain from a vote, right? if you're not comfortable with. So that is an option as well, just so you're
I
aware.
think I'm going to go ahead and abstain because I really, really hate the yellow district on both of these maps and on map E that we're voting for. So I'll abstain.
Okay, so that is Counselor Hoban, no, Counselor Whipple abstain, and the remainder were a yes. Motion passes. We will move on. I really appreciate everyone's just thoughtful. Just, I can tell everyone really cares about doing the right thing for the people of Provo. That's one thing I love about this council. All right, an ordinance amending Provo City Code, Chapter 1508, fees, citywide application. And this will be presented by Aaron Ardmore. Come on up. He looks hesitant there for a second, like, oh, really?
I only was hesitant because last time Brian Jones took this one for me. Because it's just the legal's office.
Is that mic on?
Attorney's office.
And I'm happy to take it again if you'd like, Aaron.
Yes, because I don't have any relevant information on it since last time.
I'm looking for.
Thank you.
Camille sent me an outline. So Camille Williams from my office was principally involved in this. As we explained in our previous work session and council session on this item, this really stems out of recognizing during a recent experience that our code didn't have a very clear process or criteria for developers that wanted to appeal or ask for adjustments to impact fees. This is a rewrite of that chapter of the code in order to do that. So I'll just run quickly, probably mostly for public benefit, because I think the councilors know most of this, but here's what the ordinance does. It shifts the evaluation of requested adjustments from the mayor to the department director because they have expertise in the specific matters. It identifies what independent calculations and individualized reviews and what documents supporting them need to be submitted depending on the type of impact fee. It defines that the developer submits the data and those studies to the director, posts a cash deposit equal to the impact fee appealed, plus the costs of the review. It gives standards for the studies and the data, standards specific to each department. It defines the powers and limitations of the directors who are reviewing those. The director has to issue a written decision within 21 days. If the review costs are higher than the estimate, the developer pays the additional costs. If the costs are lower, the city refunds the excess. The fee payer may appeal the decision of the department director. The appeal goes to an impact fees committee. The developer has to pay the fees under protest, but they have to be paid in order to appeal. Only the fee payer may appeal. It outlines the process for filing that appeal. And it clarifies that the enactment of the impact fee itself is presumed to be fair and valid, and that the appeal is only about the application or specific application of the fee to their development. The committee consists of the CAO and 2 department directors that are uninvolved in the appeal, and lays out what the process for considering that appeal is, and then defines their appeal rights following that committee's decision to the district court. Any questions?
Councilor Whipple.
Yeah, I didn't see that I got a text of it to review. Was that an email I missed or something?
We didn't send out a specific email. We just updated it in OnBase, so it should have been published in your materials.
In that folder, it just has like a 1-page PowerPoint, or maybe I'm looking in the wrong place.
It's looking. It should be titled ordinance. It was. Unfortunately, don't have my PC with me at the moment, but it was in there earlier today when I was looking at it.
Page 32 of the file.
Because of all the stuff that's deleted.
Or just the read.
Oh. Oh.
This is me still learning how to navigate the materials that are given to me. I apologize.
No, that's fine. And I apologize for not having sent it. I didn't realize that it hadn't been.
Yeah, the repeat is just going to file. Yeah, anyway, it's in there a couple times.
Oh, right.
Additional questions or comments?
Chair Hoban, while she's looking at that, let me just comment. I'd been about to the point of saying this anyway, and then Cliff reminded me. The redistricting ordinance, we're gonna have to actually come back to that, because what you essentially did is picked which map goes into the ordinance, but the ordinance needs to list all of the precinct numbers. And so John is upstairs inserting all the precinct numbers for that map into the ordinance. When he's done, we'll need to come back and vote on the implied motion to adopt the amended ordinance.
Just let me know when it's ready. Okay. We will open this item up for public comment. I don't see any hands raised online. Anyone in the chamber like to comment on this item? Okay. Then we'll bring it back to the council for discussion.
Right here.
I'll just make the comment that I'm happy to see a process. I'm happy to see something code updated, and I'm also happy to have a committee to review these appeals as opposed to one elected person. I think that's a smart, better way of reviewing these in the future. So I'm highly supportive of it.
Chair Hoban, one of the things I neglected to mention, I did mention this in the last council meeting. We do have a little bit of a time crunch here because of the fact that we noticed this almost 6 months ago as a temporary to invoke the pending legislation rule. I think I would hope that unless there are glaring problems, that we might go ahead and adopt it tonight. And if there are small problems, we can do text amendments to fix those in the meantime. But this needs to be adopted before the beginning of March in order for it to be effective under the pending legislation rule on any appeals that get submitted.
Okay. Maybe explain that text amendment process so we could adopt something tonight.
Right. So if again, if there's a major problem, we just need to fix it. But if for instance,
comma or a dotted I.
Yeah, there's some kind of, maybe one step of the process seems like maybe there might be a way to do it a little bit better. We could always take that feedback. We'd run it through planning commission. Planning staff could run, or the legal office could run an amendment, and we just run it through planning commission and get it back to you to fix whatever was there.
Okay, so if there's something foundationally wrong, we fix it tonight or not approve it. Otherwise, we can approve it and then make slight tweaks after, is what you're saying.
If it's an issue of, hey, we think it'd be better if the committee was 5 people instead of 3 people or something like that, we can fix those anytime. If it's, hey, this entire process doesn't work, then obviously that doesn't work.
Okay, so any additional discussion then? If not, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you all. Thank you, Aaron. Okay. An ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 1.39 acres of real property from 46 West to 90 West on 800 North, from residential conservation RC to campus mixed use CMU, and authorizing a related development agreement, North Park neighborhood, presented again by Aaron Ardmore.
Thank you, Council. If we could just bring the slides up from the Planning Commission, just to refresh our memories on what we looked at a couple weeks back. This was for this rezone. We had quite a discussion on different elements of it in regards to the concept plan and things like that. And we were directed, the applicant and staff was directed to work on a development agreement to address the concerns of the council and the planning commission. So in the last 2 weeks, development agreement has gone back and forth between our office, the attorney's office, and the applicant, Mr. Mettler. We do have a proposed development agreement. I'm not sure if they've all seen that. Was that sent out?
I don't know whether, I don't know that it made it into the materials. It probably didn't, because I think I sent it off to you. Last I had seen was that there was some ongoing conversation between you and the developer. I didn't get it back, so I didn't send it to staff.
So to update from that point, the applicant did review the edits that the attorney's office made on the draft of the development agreement. He can speak to this to confirm it, but from what I understand, he's agreeable to the elements of the development agreement. I can just kind of summarize those in section 4. It speaks about the parking will be provided at the typical rate of Provo City Code to our typical standard, unless transportation demand management is agreed upon and approved by the planning commission. In that case, the applicant or property owner would have to follow that standard. And it goes on to talk about ensuring the total number of vehicles utilized by the tenants will not exceed the number of spaces on the site. That would be included in the terms of a rental contract with the tenants, to be managed by the property owner, to be enforced by the property owner, and that any issues found in that phase 1, if you recall, there's kind of a phased approach to this project. If there are any issues found in phase 1, that those would be addressed in phase 2, that additional parking could be provided in phase 2. So that's there. Oh, and they're bringing it up. That will help me a lot. All right. So right now we're looking at 4. So A and B is the added language for what would be proffered here. It's most of it just is in regards to most of that in A and B is just for the parking. You can see C addresses the project height, so it limits both phases of the project to no taller than 50 feet. If you recall, that was because the zone itself would allow for a taller height up to 75 feet. So this development agreement, if agreed to with all parties, would hold them at 50. And then the last part of the development agreement that was added in, other than kind of the standard template language, is in section 9M. And that goes to, there's a lot of discussion, if you recall, about kind of a sunset clause with a phased approach. There's some concerns about building phase 1 and leaving phase 2 out there and having the whole property zoned. So I believe that is addressed in 9M3 for your review. So staff is still supportive of this. I think we feel even more confident with this development agreement that this will be a good project for the city. We think that zone fits. And if the council and the applicant and the mayor are all agreeable to development agreement shown, we would recommend approval.
Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah, in that 3, about phase 2, 10 years. Why 10 years? Could it be 5 years?
I suppose it could. 10 years was what was talked about 2 weeks ago. And that was because that seemed to be kind of the view, the vision of the property owner of when that Foxwood Apartments would kind of reach its end of life and something would have to be done there. And that was kind of a date that was thrown around by the council as well.
Do you think that they could come back in 10 years and be like, oh no, end of life is 20 years from now?
I think that would have to amend the development agreement, and that would be a decision in front of you guys once again.
Well, we won't be here. I won't be here.
Right.
Sorry. And then, so let's pretend we get to 10 years, not me, but 10 years from now, that phase hasn't been built, then what happens?
So if we get there, and just backing up what Aaron said, the 10 years came from two things. In M1, 10 years is our standard in these, is just standard in the template for when the agreements normally end and the vested rights go away if they haven't built anything yet. M3 is added in there to talk about the idea of if they build phase one, but they don't build phase two. And I didn't want it to automatically expire, because if it automatically expires, then somebody can come in and build something on the phase two property within the allowable zoning with no restrictions under the development agreement.
Could build something in the CM
right
zone. Okay.
Right. So what 3 says is that at the end of 10 years, their vested rights to the phase two project and or are discretionarily able to be terminated. And so the council would actually have to, at that point, do one of 3 things: terminate the agreement, which by itself probably isn't a great idea, but this also gives the council the right to rezone the property. So they could rezone it to what it was originally before this all happened, or something else. And they can also rezone and terminate the agreement. So that's discretionary by the council. If the council doesn't do anything, nothing happens, and the agreement just continues on with whoever is the owner of the property being bound to build only what is attached to the development agreement or not build.
Okay. So why do we go through this complex multiple clauses instead of just rezoning like the phase one and leaving out the phase two until they're ready to build, until they're ready to change the actual land use?
Well, I mean, really, that's really a question for the developer, but I guess what I would say is, contrary to longstanding Provo City practice, this is actually the official and historical reason for development agreements, which is to preserve the rights for future phases while the developer is getting ready to build them. The history of development agreements is that they were originally created for the purpose of a developer coming in and saying, for my project to work, I need to build on 50 acres, but I only have the money to build on 10 now. And if I build on 10 now, and you come along city in 5 years before I get the rest of my money together and rezone the other 40 acres so that I can't build anymore, my project will fail. So I will agree to your restrictions on the property if you will agree that for the entire time I'm working on my project, you won't rezone the property so that I can finish my project.
Okay. And that makes sense to me when it's there's a large acreage or it's a greenfield site. And this is not a lot of acreage. It's less than 1.5 acres. And it's an infill, if that. Just my observations.
So I do know, Shannon, if they didn't include that other land, they can only build like half the size of their building. Yeah.
I know, but we normally don't give people favors and include their neighbor's yard for their, purposes. So to me, it's an unusual setup, especially because we're not applying it to maybe a 200-acre development where it will be phased over decades.
Mr. Chairman, let me just go on record. I think this is a good project. I think Mr. Mettler has been very responsive to our concerns. I think the development agreement incorporates everything we raised previously. And I move we approve.
We have to have public comment.
Yeah, so hold that thought, Counselor Fillmore. We kind of started delving into maybe the discussion portion. Sorry about that. Any additional questions? I do have some, but does anybody else have some first? All right. So can I just go back? I guess, well, let me ask on this. How does this incentivize them to build? It doesn't. I thought we were trying to incentivize them to like, or basically carrot and stick them to saying, yeah, we're going to definitely build because we told you we were going to build, and that's why we needed this property because we needed more density. But maybe not. Am I wrong on that?
Well, I guess it incentivizes them to build phase two, because if they don't do it within 10 years, they potentially lose the right to ever do it and to ever use the other property to fix any parking problems that they might be having, which maybe that makes it worse.
If they don't fix parking problems, if there are parking problems and and this is another question. So the TDM or transportation demand model, they have to agree to a certain number of parking spots. They can have a reduced amount because of that. But you're saying because of what they put in here, if there's issues, we have some teeth because of that TDM to like actually enforce, hey, you're not doing what you said. And so you're going to have to go back to the standard parking, which means you're going to have to tear up 7 units after the fact or whatever and put in additional parking somehow on the roof.
Right. And that's why, despite maintaining the flexibility here in paragraph 3 of allowing the council to terminate the agreement, my recommendation now to the council 10 years from now would be not to terminate the agreement, but just to rezone the property. Because then all of the obligations of the agreement then continue because they never finished, but they lose the ability to actually build what they originally planned on the other part of the property.
Okay, so how this incentivizes them to actually build that phase is it really only incentivizes them to build phase 2 if there's parking issues.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, the developer and Aaron would have to talk more about that. I don't know exactly all of the details about phase 2 and whether it gets them more units or better units or higher end units to increase revenue down the road. And before I cede the mic back to you, I just want to be super clear though, that your questions are good questions because the kinds of questions you're asking are exactly why I actually hate development agreements. Because I'm going to be honest with you that 10 years from now, nobody's going to remember this agreement exists, right? So unless somebody actually complains about it. So this is our best effort to try to with the tools we have to try to meet the concerns that have been raised, but there are definitely flaws with the tool so that we're going into this eyes wide.
Yeah, I think ultimately I was just looking for something that would motivate them. That's what I'm looking for. Motivate them to build phase 2 because frankly, the phase 2 property is being thrown in so that they can have additional density. And, to Councilor Ellsworth's point, it's kind of like, and I think this was a concern of the Planning Commission too. I'm kind of feeling they're kind of like gut check right now of like, this feels a little off, but evaluating the property in and of itself or the development in and of itself. I mean, maybe I'm getting more stuck on the principle of it than the actual issue of the property itself. But let me ask one more question, Mr. Fillmore. So can we go to the parking piece that was in here? So it was
back on paragraph 4.
Okay, so requiring potential tenants to declare the number of vehicles to be utilized and declining to rent to tenants for which project. So basically, they're going to set a certain number of parking permits essentially, or I guess I was looking for maybe something like we had with Amanda Knight Hall where, you're only going to have as many parking permits as available as you have spots. And I think that says it, but it doesn't say permits. It just says, but does it effectively accomplish the same thing?
I mean, I think it does. I think I based that paragraph just off of what they said in the meeting about what their idea was of how they were going to do it. There are certainly other ways to structure it, but
declining to rent to tenants for which the project has insufficient parking spaces. Yeah, so basically, they can't rent to tenants, or they can't. They can't rent to tenants if they have more cars than available. I don't know. I thought it seems a little muddy, wouldn't you think, as opposed to like maybe something that has to do with like certain number of parking permits, only issuing a number of parking permits compared to the number of spots available. Wouldn't that be cleaner from a enforceability standpoint? No?
Well, I made the face I made because this goes back to my not loving this tool, because the enforceability is frankly really a problem anyway.
I thought we had some sort of enforceability though, because of the transportation demand model.
Well, that's the main enforcement. Okay, now first of all, recognize that my understanding is they do not currently have a TDMP approved, right? And they have to get one approved by the Planning Commission according to the criteria in the city ordinance to even be able to reduce their parking. If they never get one approved, they can't reduce their parking. If they do get one approved and the parking that they are, and it is later determined by the Planning Commission that reduced amount of parking is insufficient, the Planning Commission can revoke the TDMP at any time. And that's actually where the real.
So in practical purpose, if somebody starts complaining, people are parking too close to my driveway and I can't see kids when I drive out or whatever, and it's clearly overparked and there's clearly too many cars, somebody could complain and that could be looked at and there could be some teeth to that.
Yeah. I mean, let's think this through logistically. The fact of the matter is that if 5 years from now, if in my office or, Scott Johnson is getting complaints about this, and let's say the complaint is that they're not really following B1, that they're renting to more people than there are spaces. As a practical matter, I'm probably not going to go file an injunction in district court trying to get them to follow that rental model. What I'm probably going to do is get planning staff and say, let's go to the Planning Commission and ask Planning Commission to revoke their TDMP. And when their TDMP is revoked, then I'm going to take them to court to say you have to tear down part of the building to make parking spaces.
All right, I think I've asked enough questions. I'll pass the question asking on to anyone else that might have some. I have some discussion for later, but I don't have any more questions. Mr. Fillmore.
I was just going to suggest that at some point we need to invite the developer to answer your questions from his perspective.
Okay. Let's go to public comment. All right. We will open this item up for public comment. Anyone come on up, Eric.
Hi, Eric Chase, and I am the neighborhood chair for this neighborhood, and I just want to once again express my support for this. I know lots of people are real concerned about the parking situation on this specifically, but in the long run, the bigger picture, the way to address parking issues is to provide housing that's closer to the amenities and the destinations and to public transit that people can use, and this is the ideal spot for that. And if you reduce the number of units available or in favor of building more parking, that kind of cumulative effect of that decision across the city just makes our parking situation everywhere worse. And so I just want to once again say that I'm in favor of this. This is an area, there's we just talked about the school board boundaries. There's no children in this area, probably within 3 or 4 blocks. There are businesses in the area that might, if we think about what's going to happen if a tenant has an extra car there and they want to park it somewhere, what's going to happen? They're either going to get a ticket or they're going to park in a spot they can't and get towed. The places where they would negatively impact community members, permanent residents, they're kind of so far spread out that I don't think it's going to be worth it for someone to park in front of my house 5 blocks away and walk over there because it's just too much of a hassle for them. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Okay. I always appreciate Eric's thoughts. I guess I'll give the developer an opportunity to answer any of the questions that have come up if you'd like to, or if you feel like they've been answered well enough by Mr. Jones or Aaron and Mr. Mettler, correct? Yeah. All right. Welcome.
Thank you for your time. Again, I'd go back to the overall question here is the campus mixed use zone appropriate for this area? And we feel that the application is appropriate for this area. The city attorney was rather tough on the development agreement, frankly, and I proposed a few things and came back with the answer was no, this is the way it's going to be. The question before the council was that you were discussing a few minutes ago was, well, what's the teeth in this to develop phase 2? I mean, we've done the planning for it. It's our intention to do that. But the question is, what's incentive to do that? The incentive behind that is that this agreement has a sunset within 10 years. And we've gone to a lot of work to try to get this area rezoned to the campus mixed use zone. We've been working on this since last January, went several times before the planning commission, and here we are now. I feel like we've got a good agreement in place. If there's some minor modifications that the council wants to make to that agreement, I would propose that we, do that tonight. If it's only issue a certain number of parking permits based upon the number of stalls that are on the property, we've already agreed to do that, and we'd be happy to have that written into the agreement. So I guess I'd be happy to answer any other questions, but would like to request, the council to approve the rezone of this 1.39 acres to campus mixed use. As I understand it, and Mr. Pepperoni may have to answer this question, or Mr. Ardmore, is that rezoning, that you've got to have at least 40,000 square feet to rezone a property to campus mixed use. Hence, that's why we went to all the work to plan both phase 1 and phase 2 into this property.
Yeah, I think I totally get where you come from. Appreciate it. I think where it's not sitting well with some of us is the phase 2 was only thrown in there to get you to the amount of density you needed. And is there really an intent to actually develop phase 2, or are we just giving you that in essence to get you where you need to be? And phase 2 won't actually ever be developed to CMU. So we're rezoning a property to CMU, but there's no intent for it to be CMU. Does that make sense? So
yeah, I mean, all I could say is that that's our intent, and things change, but as of this moment, that is our intent to do that. And I'm not sure that I could sell it any differently than to stand here and just tell you that that's our intent. And I mentioned before, I've got at least 1 or 2 partners that would rather tear it down sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm just helping you understand maybe where those who are kind of have some concern with it. That's, I think, where they're coming from, myself included. But again, I'm trying to evaluate the project on the merit of phase 1 alone. And any additional questions for the developer while he's up?
And I don't know. I guess I would state that I think just phase 1 in and of itself, I think improves that property there and is an addition to the neighborhood, given the fact that we got 4 old houses sitting there, and it's really not a residential neighborhood. And it really, in my opinion, the campus mixed use zone is appropriate for that neighborhood there. So, and in the last presentation, I mean, whether you look north, south, east, or west, there's multi-unit housing in every direction that you look there. And so I just, again, would say, I feel like it's the appropriate zone for that area. And if not there, where would you do this? Because the proximity to BYU is 2 blocks, a block over to transportation, 4 blocks down to Smith's. You know, you're 8 blocks any direction to like the stadium, the Marriott Center, Center Street in Provo. I mean, it seems like the appropriate location for this application, but
I appreciate that.
are there any other questions I can answer or?
I think we're good. Appreciate it. We'll bring it back to discussion here. So
Okay,
I actually, no, you can sit down. Thanks. So I'll just share my 2 cents kind of while I got the mic already hot. So I'm kind of looking at this, like I have to evaluate this project based on phase 1, because I don't know if phase 2 is really going to happen. I mean, I can appreciate you saying you want to, but look, we don't know what's going to happen. 5 years from now, we have a recession, 10 years, we just don't know. So I'm evaluating the project on phase 1 itself. I think to the developer's point, the 4 homes that are there, I think this project will look really cool. It will add a lot of housing, but if I could just explain why I'm having a little bit of like heartburn about it, it has to do with parking. I know, crazy, like coming back to parking. But I went over to Amanda Knight Hall for yesterday and today, this morning, and I sat in the parking lot like a creeper and stopped people. And yes, exactly. Excuse me, miss. So I stopped people and I asked them about, what it's about the parking situation at Amanda Knight Hall. John, do you have those 2 little videos that we could play? And if they're not loud enough, go ahead and pause them. Yes, and I did videotape some or video record some.
Live at Amanda Knight Hall, and you have a parking spot.
Okay, so start it over, and can we increase the volume at all?
Did this person give permission to be filmed?
Yes, she did, as you can see. Well, I guess you can't tell she knows she's being filmed, but I do have that on camera, yes.
Oh, that's beautiful. Okay, so you live at Amanda Knight Hall, and you have a parking spot, but you have roommates that do not?
Yeah.
How many roommates do you have?
I have 4 roommates, and one of the other ones has a parking spot, but the others don't.
Okay, so out of the 5 of you, 2 have parking spots, and the other 3 do have cars?
Yeah.
And where do they park?
They just have to find street parking, and it's usually like really far away.
Okay, and then let's play the next one. I just took a couple clips of the video. Hey, come on, this is good quality research here.
Why did they bring a car? Like, why do they have a car if because you're right next to...
So here I ask her, why do you have a car if you're right next to transit? Go ahead and start it over, John. Sorry.
Why did they bring a car? Like, why do they have a car because you're right next to transit, so why do they need a car?
I think a lot of people come from out of state, so that's why they bring a car with them to college.
Okay. And so even though they have transit close by, like, what are they using their car for if transit's close by? What do they need their car for?
I think people just like the convenience of having their car. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think you can expect someone to get rid of their car because there's public transportation.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for humoring me, everyone. So I talked to 5 people, and some had 3 roommates, some had 4 roommates, and every one of them said all of their roommates have cars. Also, one said that Amanda Knight Hall is overparked. So even though they have the parking permit, they have sold more permits than they committed to. So I'm not saying this needs to derail Mr. Mettler's development. You need to change your vote. But what I'm saying is we have to start thinking differently and realistically here. We are not changing human behavior by reducing the supply of parking. They're still bringing their cars, and they're still going to need a place to park them. And so I like I said, I'm not saying we need to stop this development and hold it up for, 16 additional parking spots or whatever. But I'm just telling you, this parking problem ain't going away. And they're literally next to transit, and they're like spitting distance from campus, and they all have cars, like all of them. So just trying to be realistic here, guys. We're not changing human behavior by reducing the number of parking spots. And so, go ahead.
Well, I'm really glad you did such a scientifically verifiable and reliable study. And I am being sarcastic on purpose because that was anecdotal. And it was a good anecdote, but it was anecdotal. So I'm not sure I'm persuaded that this means that we should.
How about this? You go sit out there for a couple hours
Okay,
and
you
talk to
did-
people
you
and
worked hard.
you see what they say.
Mr. Hoban, were you wearing the shirt with Mr. Hanley's face on it? 'Cause that would make this an even better anecdote.
My concern, my point is serious, and that is as helpful as that information is, it's not very reliable information because it is anecdotal. I'm not, let me
Have that's
finish my
more
point.
reliable. What do you have that's more reliable than me sitting out in the parking lot and asking them?
Okay, Mr. Hoban, I'm trying to make a point. And it's a serious one, and that is that if you want to know how many students are violating parking and should be using bikes instead, then we need to dig in to get that information more reliably than just talking to people. I'm not saying you shouldn't have done that or that it doesn't tell us anything. I'm just saying it doesn't give us the information that I think is helpful in terms of, it's not reliable. And ultimately, I said this the last time this issue came up, there's a very serious risk of overbuilding for parking that is not something that any of us should take lightly, because that is an extraordinarily expensive thing to do. And if we're sort of caving into the worst behavior on our policy issues, then I think we're actually developing bad policy. So I do think the issue of getting Amanda Knight residents in compliance, or getting the future residents of this property into compliance, is separate from what our policy ought to be, because otherwise we're just chasing after the worst behavior and ceding ground to it and saying, well, we should organize our policy around abusive behavior rather than compliant behavior. I'm not trying to be intentionally naive about the fact that, too many students rely on cars. That's a conversation that I hope to continue to have with BYU. All of us should have with BYU, because there are more aggressive steps that they can take to incentivize students to leave cars at home. And we're still in the midst of a struggle of a cultural change. And so I'm just saying, identifying, because I could have gone out and identified 5 students who have committed to never driving a car while they're at BYU. I know more than 5. So I'm just saying, I don't know that tells me that this isn't worth doing. And you said you weren't actually intending to make that point anyway. So I think I'm in fair grounds, right? Anyway, I think this is a great project. I'm very happy with the development agreement, and I want to make a motion that we pass this zone request.
Second on the motion?
There's an implied motion, right?
Yep, implied motion, that's right.
But I have a comment.
Go ahead.
To the point about parking is never going to not be an issue in a college town next to the campus, right? And so I think it is a fair comment, maybe not the data gathering methods, if we call that data. But we've spent many hours talking about parking here, and Mr. Harding spent many hours, years of his life, working on parking. And part of the concern is that we've allowed developers who are an important part of our community to not build enough parking, and therefore the inhabitants are forced to use a public good, which is the street. And now we don't like them using the public good, and so we want to charge them for the public good for parking on the street, right? And so we've never found an appropriate balance, it seems, for the parking requirement, especially adjacent to campus. So there are concerns about parking. More importantly to me is the concern that Mr. Hoban brought up about the phase 2 being added in only to meet the CMU zone minimum standards. And this is not, to me, the CMU zone does not fit. It's not a mixed use development. And honestly, what's going to be immediately redeveloped is not big enough to fit that zone. So there's kind of 2 strikes against it. And I'm wondering, why couldn't phase 1 be MDR? Or some other zone, right? Why does it have to be this zone? So I'll just add, the Planning Commission had concerns about this. I think the majority of them voted against it. I think 3 of them are professional planners, and I hold them in high esteem. I think they looked at this from multiple angles, and they want to see housing alternatives, especially around campus, but they didn't feel good about it either. So I think those are things that we should consider, is that this is not a mixed use development. And the zone probably doesn't fit. There's other zones. There's many other zones.
I just have to give my 2 cents on the parking thing. Eric mentioned that, it's right next to campus. It's unnecessary amount of parking. But we do have to admit that even if these kids aren't using their car very often, they may use it way less. They still have a car and they still park it. And continually creating the same problem that we have over and over. I mean, I've heard so much from businesses that are around that area, and they're already dealing with parking issues. And some of these girls that Travis talked to park over there on the other side of University, over by where this development's going to be. And that's at least 15 cars that he got in his very unscientific study. But that's 15 cars that are parking on the other side of University. So we already have it happening, and certainly don't want to add to it. But and I'm just mentioning the parking for future stuff. Like, I think that's going to be something that it's going to be a big deal on my voting in the future, as far as developments, that we are taking care of the residents and the residents of that building. So I've talked to a lot of BYU students while I was campaigning, and they all complained about the parking, and they were mad that they were paying for a parking permit, but there was no spot when they got to their apartment at 10 o'clock after work. So these are issues that are so bothering to them. And I don't think BYU is going to do a thing about it. They can't control if someone brings a car or not. These kids are going to lie about their development things. Like, I told my mom I'd be home by 10 and I'm home at 11. I don't know. It's just like, it's just not the nature that they're going to sign easily away saying they don't have a car and they're going to just park it down the street. I don't know. We can't control that.
All right. Oh, Counselor Whipple.
So I will say, on the Amanda Knight Hall, my daughter looked at living there, and it was like $600 for a shared room plus common fees and utilities. So these are probably more affluent kids who are coming and living in there. When I was an undergrad, I did not have a car. My husband ended up buying a 1980 Datsun pickup truck that was a rust bucket that I had to push for us to start every time. And after we got married, we had that one car. It was awesome. For this development, I think this is a great project, and I'm happy that they have found some sort of a zone that would allow them to build it. I think it's good, and that they have agreed to put in their contract that it is grounds for termination and eviction if you bring additional cars, knowing that this is an area with incredibly high demand for apartments. Means that they don't lose anything if they have to evict someone on these grounds. They will have a line of couples coming to take that apartment. So this idea that the tenants would willy-nilly violate this when they know they could lose this apartment, that was something that we talked about, and it is in there. Which, Brian, do you recall which paragraph that is?
It was in the where they agreed to the development agreement, where they agreed to evict people if they exceeded the,
Yeah, it's back in
their allocated
paragraph
parking.
4 of the development agreement.
So I think that with the demand for housing and this mechanism, I'm not concerned about people exceeding the parking for this particular area. My concerns on that front have been allayed.
All right. Well, I guess I'll make a comment. I know that it wasn't scientific, but it was better than anything else has to refute it. So unless you got something to refute it, the first 5 people I asked said that. So I'm sticking to my guns here. I liked your story. I actually liked your story very much so.
I ride my bike.
I didn't have a car until my sophomore year,
Who
so,
rode their bike?
or junior year. That's awesome. So I'm going to go to Counselor Ellsworth, and then Mr. Metler, are you responding to my specific comment? It was just kind of being snarky, but I will give you a chance to respond. But go ahead, Counselor Ellsworth.
Yeah, this is, I'm just looking at the map, trying to capture some more information here. It looks like all of this is in the RC zone, right? There's not two zones here. Two like existing zones. Okay, thanks.
So I actually wanted to answer Counselor Ellsworth's question. So, if this were MDR, I think they could only get like 40 units or something, right? Wasn't that the reason that this went to CMU, was to try to add more density?
I can address that. So HDR would be the next one down. There's a density cap on that of 50 units to the acre. That would cap them at 39. To answer that.
Okay, so we were trying to get them from
39, sorry.
39
units.
39, but across phase 1 and 2, or 39 on just phase 1 on the front parcel?
Looking just at phase 1. Phase 2 is another 40 units with a.
Okay, and yeah, even with HDR, my sentiment remains. Like, why couldn't it be HDR?
I think the bigger question might be, is the project appropriate? I mean, we have all these tools in our zoning chapter to use, right? We have so many residential zones. If it's a good project, whatever zone gets it there would be appropriate in staff's opinion. But
Well, to me, there is a difference because what we're calling phase 1 is a separate parcel, right? Separate parcels. And so those can be rezoned as HDR without having to kind of fudge or shoehorn in phase 2. And phase 2 can be zoned as HDR in 4 years or 9 years or 17 years.
Okay, so follow-up question. Why do we limit HDR to, why would we limit it to 39 units in this situation? Like 50 units per acre.
it's the regulation of the zone.
Right, but why? Why do we have
That's
it
what
that
was
way?
adopted.
But why? You get what I'm saying? Maybe I'm not making myself clear, but there's a reason we limited it to 50, right? That a zone is specific to a certain area and we didn't want to go, or was it just willy-nilly, I guess? I mean,
a planner would never say a decision is willy-nilly.
well, that's what I'm saying.
We can't be
That's,
arbitrary.
but there was a reason it was limited, and now we're circumventing that reason, or as Mr. Harding would say, flouting the intent. We'll bring him back here for that comment, but we're flouting the intent of the zone, right? Essentially. Anyways.
I wrote the multifamily zones because we were trying to replace the strategy of doing a new pro zone on every multifamily project. In order to help get those multifamily zones to pass, we put density limits on those zones, LDR, MDR, HDR. But we put no density limit on campus mixed use. We put no density limit on ITOD. We put no density limit downtown. To Mr. Ardmore's point, once the staff is comfortable that this is an appropriate project for the parcel, the fact that he's taking density off of this parcel and moving it over there, I really don't care. If Mr. Butler had come in and asked for a 75-foot building, which is allowed under that zone, at that point, we would have said, no, that's out of context of the neighborhood. We're not comfortable with that. So we're not comfortable with that tool. Again, the point is we were comfortable with the size and scope and number of units on this parcel.
So then how can we make it work?
That's right.
You figured it out.
That's right. If it's appropriate for this density, why would you play games to knock down the density?
Got it.
You're just moving that density somewhere else, right?
Okay, I get that. So I guess Counselor Ellsworth, and okay, so we're kind of at least having a little heartburn based on the principle of the zone, but the project in and of itself, is it appropriate for that area and that amount of space? And we have to rezone it and to make it work.
Well, we're not really looking at the project. The project is under the purview of the Planning Commission to determine if the project is good. We're looking at the zone.
Okay.
And so we've delegated our authority, if you will, on the project to the Planning Commission. And so we're considering the zone. So whatever goes in the zone, that's what we're approving because we've determined that the Planning Commission will handle the project. But let me put it this way. I have a little lot in Provo, and then my neighbor has a little lot. We'll say their last name's the Joneses. What if I come in with an application and say, me and the Joneses, we want to upzone our properties and I'm going to build a fourplex on my little lot. The Joneses are someday going to build a fourplex on their lot and the Joneses never build it. I got a sweetheart deal. I got a heck of a deal. And is everybody going to go around doing that? Just, I appreciate that the staff is trying to accommodate and make projects work. That's their job. But the precedent makes me uncomfortable. And I'll just add, that's what I understood from the planning commission, that this is a kind of a backdoor entrance to this kind of zoning that was outside of the intent, seems to be outside of the intent.
So I would say that these parcels already have common ownership. So it's different than the scenario that you described. And that I'm in favor of phase 1 of the project, even if phase 2 doesn't get built. This is the kind of thing that we need in this city right now, especially in these high transportation corridors and close to campus. We complain about housing affordability, about lack of housing, about not being able to find a place to live. Every single day, we get another message in my church groups on Facebook and in our email list. People are looking for places to live. Why would we stop a good project like this that is helping to solve that problem?
All right. Mr. Miller, 60 seconds to answer my question. I don't even remember what it was.
I can do that. Again, I appreciate the survey that you did, and I wish you'd gone a couple blocks over to our married complex that we manage, because I mean, that's what the transportation engineers looked at, is on a comparable scale, how many cars are they bringing to that project? And they found that what we proposed is consistent with that project. So there's a difference between single college students that have got to get back home on the weekends and a married couple, and what can they afford to drive? And that's what this project is built for. And again, you're not going to find, even though you could say, well, 3 batching singles could live there. Look at the size of the rooms. There's not going to be 3 batching singles there. It's really going to be a couple that's going to be sharing one bed, because not much more than one bed, unless you're going to put a bunk bed in there, is going to fit. So, I mean, I really think we're beating this way up. I just feel like the zone, the proposed zone is consistent for that area and appropriate here. So again, I appreciate the study, but it was kind of not comparing apples and oranges there a little bit. So just my opinion.
In all fairness, you guys know why I went to the Mannonite Hall, because we had mentioned in the previous meetings that they weren't having problems. And so I actually went there expecting to hear that there weren't problems. Okay, anyways, we can move on from my unscientific study. I won't reference it again as proof. I learned my lesson. Any additional comments? Yes, sir.
As a former 3-month resident of Amanda Night Hall, can I just recommend we vote?
All right. So I'm going to actually make a substitute motion that in the development agreement, we tie the number of parking spots to number of parking permits. It doesn't really change anything materially, but it does clarify in my mind. And Brian says nobody's going to know, but here, remember this in 10 years. Okay, well, at least I feel like I've made a difference in one development agreement.
Which is fair. Let me ask this clarifying question for the sake of trying to get through this in this meeting. Like I mentioned in the last meeting, we don't normally actually draft the development agreements prior.
Yeah.
Would you be comfortable if your motion is to approve the implied motion as currently shown, but directing staff to amend the, well, I got to finish it for the record though. To amend the development agreement prior to execution to require that that there be parking permits for the parking stalls and that they not rent more. How did you put it? That they don't have more permits than stalls.
Yes, I would like to make that motion.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion. All right, we'll vote on that.
Sorry, this is a motion that only pertains to the development agreement.
Sorry, and
Well, no, my suggestion is this is actually going to approve it. But what you're doing is you're authorizing me after the meeting's over to make the amendment and sign it with the change.
only discussion I have is I'm running again in 10 years if you issue too many passes. All right, I'm going to go do another unscientific study, creeper style. All right, let's vote on the motion. Yeah, that's true. Let's vote on the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? Counselor Ellsworth opposed. The rest in favor. Thank you. Okay. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, so we have to revisit the redistricting. We have to actually approve the ordinance.
You have it ready to, can you put it up on the screen? So all that you need to do, we've already had public comment, everything, all that you need to do, unless there is discussion on it, is to call for a vote on the implied motion to approve the ordinance as amended, now showing the precincts with the map that you've already selected.
Okay, so if there's no discussion, we'll call for a vote on the ordinance redistricting the school board zones, school board districts.
John, can you scroll back up to the precincts? There was a question about whether we got them all. So how many precincts are there? Nine times, yeah.
Some of them just have 6 or 7.
Okay, we'll call for a vote. Oh, okay. Can we go down, John, so that they can see the first section A?
I'm sorry, we've double checked all of these numbers on the precincts. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All in favor? All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. All right. Oh. Yeah, Brian can repeat that.
Is that all she's missing is who made it and who seconded? The motion was by Travis.
Yes, Counselor Hoban made the motion and Counselor Fillmore seconded. All right, thank you. Okay, so an ordinance amending Provo City Code Titles 14 and 15 and the consolidated fee schedule to clarify language and correct errors. We heard this in the work meeting, and Aaron Ardmore, Planning Supervisor, will present this.
Thank you. This one should be a bit simpler, hopefully. So if you want to go to, I have a kind of summary page from Planning Commission if you want to pull that up. So this is something that as planning staff, we kind of collect through typically a calendar year, issues that we find in the code while we're reviewing plans or working in different situations. Some of them are correcting errors or past references. A lot of them more so are to clarify language, where we thought the language was clear, we come upon discussions where maybe it wasn't as clear as it needed to be. So we do this every year. So this is what we found in 2021, some of the easy fixes that we found that don't make substantive changes to the spirit of the titles. that these amendments are in, but just provide some more clarity and correct some errors. So I'm happy to address any particular amendment, any code section that is up here, but that's really all I have for this one.
I watched the planning commission meeting on this, and I'm wondering, they brought up the fact that in your landscape standards in the parking, that your diamonds, the trees would die because they're not big enough. Did you change that?
No, because of the kind of the scope of this, we weren't prepared to in that meeting look at that standard, do the proper research, and kind of make a recommendation on that. I did make note of that, and we let them know that that would come back in a future proposal if we thought that some amendments were necessary there.
Okay, any additional questions? If not, we'll open this item up for public comment. Doesn't look like there's any hands raised online. Any comments from in the chamber? No, we'll bring it back for discussion. Any discussion on the motion? We'll go ahead and vote. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. All right. An ordinance amending the zone map classification of approximately 7.5 acres of real property generally located at 351 West Center Street from public facilities to general downtown. This is presented by Aaron Ardmore. Go for it.
Okay, thanks. So this one's kind of exciting. So this is really getting this property ready for development. So this property, yes. So we have 2 blocks here the city owns. The majority of it is in the PF zone. So where the new city center is being built right now is mostly in the downtown zone already. So we're just correcting all of this to the downtown zone in an effort to kind of pave the way for the future developer of our current site to come in and provide a mixed-use development that will benefit the city. So that's why we're pushing this forward, and have any questions for me, I'll try to address those.
Any questions?
There could be a brew pub in this zone, right?
There can be, yes.
Cool, thanks.
Full circle. Any additional questions? We'll open this item up for public comment. Anyone in the chamber? Anyone online? Doesn't look like it. So we'll bring it back for discussion. Any discussion? Okay, we'll go ahead and we'll take a vote. All in favor? That is unanimous. Last item. A presentation regarding Provo City General Plan, Part 3 of 3. We did hear this in the work meeting, and this is primarily an opportunity for anyone in the public to be able to come and comment and give us feedback. So, you know, Bill, we were presented this in work meeting, and I'd encourage the public to go back and view that work meeting session. If Hannah's not available, I think, John, I think we're comfortable if you just want to or Malia, one of you just come up, and I guess Bill, you can cover it. I don't know, somebody. We don't need to wait, right?
Did you just want like a quick summary and then we would open this up to public
That
comment?
is exactly what I would like. Thank you, Counselor Ellsworth. Quick summary again, and we'll open it up.
So we're now just looking at the last third of the general plan. We've talked in the afternoon session about how we're going to do some additional surveying. We feel as a staff that this is a very important document. So it's important for us to measure twice and cut once. This is going to guide our city for the next 20 years. The city's spending considerable amount of money on this, so we feel like it's important to get it right. We would love to hear any comments the public has. We have been meeting with neighborhood chairs recently, and we've gotten some really valuable feedback from those neighborhood chairs. So public input has continued even outside of public meetings, but we're happy to hear any input people want to give tonight, or any of you want to give us tonight, and we'll proceed with the process. That's all I have.
Yeah.
Good question. Could you say more about, excuse me, meeting with neighborhood chairs? Because I've had some conversations recently about the lack of neighborhood chair engagement or perceived lack. Yeah. Okay. Well, I just am curious have you been, calling them all together? You've been going around to different areas of the city? I'm just curious for the public's sake.
There are neighborhood chairs that tend to be very engaged. I've asked Brandon specifically to reach out to those.
Bill, hold on. Looks like we might have lost your audio. The mic was on.
Is it on now?
There we go.
Okay.
All right.
So there are a couple very engaged neighborhood chairs that I asked Mr. Larson to reach out to specifically, and those are ones he did meet with. They had read the plan very thoroughly, and they had pointed out kind of conceptual inconsistencies they saw with it. They weren't correcting language. They weren't wordsmithing this. They were talking about general concepts, and they raised some issues that I think were very good. One of those issues was in every plan we've previously had in the city, we've talked to some degree about protecting existing neighborhoods. Years ago, when we did 50-year planning for Provo, in order to protect existing neighborhoods, we identified areas most ripe for redevelopment and suggested that should take place in those areas. As we started to go through different iterations of the general plan, we started doing some tweaking in that regard. But this neighborhood chair pointed out the tweaking you've done actually has raised more confusion than clarity, because now it conflicts with other areas and other things that are being said. So we need to work on that whole topic. So I thought that was a very salient and insightful comment. But anyway, as I say, we've been continuing to take public input privately outside of public meetings, and it's been very helpful input.
I'm curious, I don't know if Karen's available, but maybe someone knows, how many times did Karen send information about the general plan to or through the neighborhood chairs? I imagine it was a handful of times.
Yes, Hannah would be the expert on that, or Karen, because Hannah's been involved in the process every step of the way. But yes, a handful of times. And
from the beginning to the middle to the end, they've been invited to participate or disseminate information or take surveys or...
Yes, they have not been ignored. Information has been sent out to them. Yeah. Invitations to engage has been sent out. Yes.
All right. Thanks, Bill. And thanks for the staff for rushing down. We kind of did your job. Bill did your job for you. Not as good, but he did it. But we appreciate your flexibility. We know sometimes things go long or go short, so it's hard to be in your shoes where you're trying to get here on time for certain things. We'll go ahead and we'll open up this item for public comment. Anyone in the chamber? All right. Yeah, you commented before. What's your name again?
Dylan Sindrich. I have been here before.
Can you spell your name for us?
Cindrich.
Thank you.
I live in Provo. And first, I want to say thanks for all the work that you guys do. I really appreciate it. My question for the council regarding the general plan has to do with the word equity. In an earlier draft of the plan, which I saw, there was a specific heading and a section about the idea of equity and how it could be applied to the city. This also included strategies which the city could implement to make Provo a more inclusive and welcoming for all. However, in this latest draft, all instances of the word equity have been removed. I'm disappointed that this decision was made. Most glaring for me was the removal of this definition of the word equity. And I'm going to quote this now. It said in the plan, equity means a fair distribution of resources, services, and opportunities, as well as impacts and responsibilities, taking into account the different circumstances and capabilities of each resident and neighborhood within Provo. I just would like to know what the issue was with this specific definition of equity within the context that we're discussing right now, not like any outside context, but this specific context. And the specific context is just the idea that all residents and areas of the city deserve a fair and just distribution of resources, services, and opportunities. I'm confused about what was so wrong with the idea of equity in this context. That all instances of the word needed to be removed, and that definition needed to be removed from the final draft of the document. I think that those residents that participated in the process that created the original document deserve at least an explanation for why that page and the word equity was completely removed. And I really think that equity is a value that we should be striving to promote as a city. And so I think that, a little bit of context would be appreciated, at least by me. Thank you.
Dylan, right?
Yeah, Dylan.
Would you mind sending an email to council@provo.org? And then I would invite everyone to respond who would like to respond.
I think you did.
You did?
Did you send an
I
email?
did not, but I'm a member of the BYU Student Urban Planning Association, and our chair also was here, I think, 2 weeks ago and made a comment, and he sent an email. And there was, I think, some additional people that signed. I wasn't there at that meeting when they did that, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. I think just invite anyone who would like to respond. If there were concerns with the word equity, it'd be great opportunity. And Dylan, just thank you for coming out and sharing your opinion and getting engaged in the process. It's awesome. Really is.
Any relation to Andy Sindrich?
That is my own.
Okay, good man.
Any additional comments on the general plan? Part 3 of 3. No, looks like we don't have any comments online. And we've given them plenty of time to call in now. So we'll bring it back to discussion by the council. Any additional discussion to building off of what we had earlier today? Of course, as always, free to send comments to the staff to review.
I'll just kind of reiterate the comments that I made earlier.
Sure.
For this public meeting, but I think that the plan that we have, it's not perfect for anyone, but I just hope that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think if it represents 80 or 90% of something that we feel good about, something that we want for the future of Provo, then let's start to move forward and not let this languish in, the fourth quarter. I mean, I'm all for measuring twice and cutting once. I don't want to undermine that sentiment, but I think there is, I just don't think that everyone is going to get exactly what they want. And so let's just be cognizant of that and think about how we can get this closer to adoption without kind of cutting the baby in half. So a lot of baby metaphors, but thank you.
A lot of cutting and a lot of babies. You really pulled that together. 2 cutting, 2. Wow, that is amazing. Appreciate your comments, Councilor Ellsworth. All right. Before we close, I want to say one thing. I want to apologize to Councilor Hanley. I interrupted him. I got a little defensive. I think I've done that twice, and once a year is, I guess I'm okay to do once a year, but I was out of decorum and out of line there, so I apologize for that, and I appreciate your patience and forgiveness there. All right. Well, if we will go ahead and end the meeting. Unless there's any objections, we'll end by unanimous consent. Thanks, everyone.